Welcome back to class. In the first part of this chapter, we derived one model which deals with money demand and money supply. So we were able to derive this graph where the money demand relationship is downward sloping and the money supply curve is a vertical line. We also examined what happens if the central bank decreases or increases money supply. In case that the central bank would increase money supply, the money supply curve would shift to the right, and this leads to a decrease of the interest rate. One open question is, how does the central bank perform this task? How does the central bank increase money supply? One central question is, how does the central bank increase money supply? In theory, but also sometimes in the financial press, we talk about the term helicopter money. Let's try to Google it and find out some pictures which display this keyword. So how does the central bank increase money supply? We assume that the central bank has a big printing machine, is printing new money, so is printing new notes. Afterwards, the central bank is boarding the helicopter, is flying over the economy, and is distributing this new money. One president of the Federal Reserve, the American Central Bank, has also a special nickname. His nickname is Helicopter Ben. When you type in this term, you can see here the governor of the Fed, Ben Bernanke, and it seems to be the case that he implemented this policy tool. So Ben Bernanke was the pilot of this helicopter and was distributing money supply. Like he was in charge during the time period of the great financial crisis in 2008-2009. And during this time period, the Federal Reserve performed an expansionary monetary policy, and therefore Ben Bernanke received this nickname, Helicopter Ben. But what about the real world? Like, how does the ECB or the Federal Reserve increase money supply in the real world? In the real world, the central bank controls money supply via open market operations. So the central bank buys bonds from commercial banks. The central bank is buying bonds from the commercial banks and is distributing liquidity, is distributing money in exchange. These deals are called open market operations because of the fact that the ECB does not buy these kind of bonds directly from the governments, but is buying the bonds at the money market or at the capital market. Hence, the ECB is dealing with commercial banks when it comes to these open market operations. The ECB performs these deals in a form of security repurchase agreement. This implies that in a strict legal sense, the central bank is not buying the bonds, but the ECB provides only a loan against a collateral. So the ECB is giving this liquidity against the collateral, and the collateral is a bond. The most important open market operation of the ECB is called main refinancing operations, and this has a duration of 1 week. On this slide, we get to know a relatively technical definition of how the central bank increases money supply. So let's be a little bit more down to earth and give a realistic example how this deal is performed. So the ECB is notifying commercial banks that the central bank wants to perform this open market operation, this main refinancing operations. So some information are released to the commercial banking sector. Afterwards, it's a case that all the commercial banks line up in front of the ECB. So there's one guy from the Deutsche Bank, and he has some bonds. He's giving these bonds to the ECB, and the ECB is providing liquidity to the Deutsche Bank. And then there is a second bank, let it be the Sparkasse Oder Spree. Also, the Sparkasse Oder Spree wants to have liquidity and is giving bonds to the ECB, and the ECB is handing over some liquidity. After 1 week, this deal is reversed. This implies that the Deutsche Banker is lining up with some liquidity in the hand, is giving the liquidity back to the ECB, and the ECB is handing over exactly the same bonds which were handed in 1 week ago. And also the guy from the Sparkasse Oder Spree has some liquidity in the hands, is handing over the liquidity to the ECB, and the ECB is giving back exactly the same bonds to the Sparkasse Oder Spree. I'm pronouncing here that it's exactly the same bonds, and this implies in case that the value of these bonds decreased over this time period of 1 week, it is not affecting the profit of the ECB, but it's affecting the profit of the Deutsche Bank or the Sparkasse Oder Spree. So the risk that the value of the bonds decrease, this is still on the side of the commercial banks, because of the fact that these kind of operations only have a duration of 1 week. The ECB is able to steer the amount of liquidity which is circulating in the commercial banking sector in a timely manner. So every week the ECB can change the amount of liquidity in the commercial banking sector. Hence, I would like to give one example for an expansionary monetary policy. When the ECB performs in the first week open market operations with the volume of 300 billion euros, then this deal is reversed like 1 week later. And in the second week, the ECB could announce one open market operation with 320 billion euro bonds. And hence it is the case that the liquidity increases from the first week to the second week by 20 billion. So the first week deal of 300 billion is reversed, but a few minutes later a new deal is announced and 320 billion euro liquidity is entering the commercial banking sector, so liquidity increased by 20 billion. In the second part, there is an example for a contractionary monetary policy. In the first week, the open market operations have a volume of 300 billion. This is reversed after 1 week and a new deal is released of 280 billion. And hence we have a contraction of money supply of the size of 20 billion. In the very lower part of the slide, you can see the balance sheet of the central bank. On the left-hand side, there are the assets, the bonds, which are received by the ECB from the commercial banking sector. And on the right-hand side, we have the liabilities, money supply in circulations, like the notes in circulation. Hence, when the ECB is performing an expansionary monetary policy, this leads to more assets on the left-hand side of the balance sheet and also to more liabilities on the right-hand side. So when the central bank performs an expansionary monetary policy, the size of the balance sheet increases. In the model we were introducing in our first video, it was the case that the interest rate played a key role. We put the interest rate on the vertical axis of our money market diagram, and the interest rate was the endogenous variable. But this was really a shortcut, because also on the bond market, it is the case that the main indicator is the bond price, and only a secondary indicator is the interest rate. Therefore, in the next part of this lecture, I would like to talk a little bit more about the relationship between bond prices and bond yields. So the relationship between the bond price and the interest rate. In the securities market, it is not the case that we determine the interest rate directly, but it is the case that we determine the bond price, and when we know the bond price, then we can determine the interest rate or the yield. The price, this is the price of the securities, like the bond price. As I mentioned already, the yield can be derived from the price. I would like to start this subchapter by looking at one real-world example. Let's assume that your grandma is giving you a gift, like a bond. It is this bond here, like the old one. It's a Christmas gift, like it's an old bond which was issued in the year 2011, and it has a duration until 2021. So the remaining duration today is 1 year. So this bond still is running 1 year, and it has a nominal value of 100 euros. So in 1 year, in 2021, you'll get 100 euros in case that you are turning in this right piece of paper, and it has a nominal interest rate of 10%. So in this text, it is mentioned that the nominal interest rate I0 is equal to 10%. So when you turn in this little piece of paper here, then you'll get 10% interest, which will be 10 euros. So more or less, your grandma is giving you a Christmas gift of 100 euros plus 10 euros in interest. But the big problem is that you'll receive this money only in 2021, so in 1 year from now. Let's assume that you need some money. You need to pay your bill in January, the beginning of 2021. So you want to sell directly this Christmas gift. You directly want to sell like your old bond to somebody else. The big question is, what about the price? For how much can you sell this bond to somebody else? And here the new bond plays a role. Let's talk about the characteristics of this new bond. It also has a duration of 1 year. It is issued today, and it has a duration until 2021. So the duration is 1 year. Nominal value is equal to 100 euros. It stems from the same company. So risk of the old and the new bond is the same, but the main difference is that on this new bond, it's only the case that the interest rate of 5% is printed on this new bond. It seems to be the case that between 2011 and 2020, the interest rate collapsed, the interest rate decreased, and nowadays this company is able to get a loan for 5%. Hence, it seems to be the case that your bond, which you receive from your grandma, has very nice characteristics. It has a much higher coupon, it has a much higher interest rate here, and therefore you will not be willing to sell this bond for like 100 euros. That's not enough, because for 100 euros the company is selling this bond which has inferior characteristics in the form of a lower interest rate. So you are able to increase the price. You are able to increase the price to the level of like 105 euros, because when somebody is investing in your bond, it will be also the case that in 1 year from now, he will receive additional 5 euros. So if somebody buys your bond for 105, in the end, this person will get 100 euros for the right part and 10 euros for the left part. So the capital gain is 5 euros. Something like that. So the price will be, for the price for the old bond, will be in the range of 105 euros. Let's strive to formalize this task and exactly compute the price of the old bond. Let's assume that there only exist these two bonds. One bond was issued in the past, the remaining duration today is 1 year, the face value is 100, the coupon is 10%. This coupon I0 is printed on the bond and it cannot be changed. The payment in 1 year from now is 110 euros. What is the yield of this bond? What is the yield of this bond IB? So we have to plug in the face value of 100 and the coupon of 10%. So we know that in 1 year from now we get back 110 euros from the issuer of this bond. So the bond yield today is equal to 110 minus the price we are paying today divided by the price we are paying today. So the yield of this bond depends on its current price, the bond price PB. What is the alternative, the other bond we are talking about? It's a new bond emission. It also has a 1 year duration. The face value is 100 euros and the coupon is the actual interest rate level I. In our Christmas example, it was the case that this interest rate was equal to 5%. In case that the yield of the old bond is larger than the current interest rate level, people would only buy the old bond. They would buy the old bond with a higher yield, and therefore the demand of this bond would increase and the price of this bond would increase. But when the price of the bond increases, then it would be the case that the yield of this bond would decrease. The higher the bond price, the lower the yield. In case that the yield of the old bond is smaller than the yield of the new bond, then people would sell the old bond, the supply of this bond would increase, the bond price would decrease, and this would affect the yield of the old bond. The yield of the old bond would increase. Only in case that the yield of the old bond is equal to the yield of the new bond, then the agents are indifferent and there is no arbitrage possibility. So the equilibrium condition is that the yield of the old bond has to be equal to the yield of the new bond. Therefore, it is the case that we can use this equilibrium condition, and we are using this equilibrium condition in our equation we were looking at. So we are inserting I, the yield of the new bond, instead of the yield of the old bond. So this is the yield of the new bond now, and now it is the case that all variables are known. The yield of the new bond is known. In our numerical example, it was 5%. Also, this coupon is known. It is printed on the bond and it cannot be changed. So the only remaining variable which is unknown is the price of the bond. Now we want to solve for the price of the old bond. So let's put PB on the other hand side of the equation. We get to this relationship here. Afterwards, we put this minus PB on the other hand side. It will pop up here with a positive sign. Then we can write PB out of brackets, which we do here. PB out of brackets, we get a 1 from this term and a plus I from that term. In the next step, we can divide by a 1 plus I. We put 1 plus I on the other hand side of the equation, and we have derived one equation where we have isolated PB on the left hand side of this equation. Now we can plug in all the information we have. We know that the old bond has a coupon of 10%. It's printed on this bond, it cannot change. And now we perform a scenario analysis. What if the new bond is sold for 5%? In case that the new bond is sold for 5%, our old bond has very nice characteristic, and the price of the old bond is 104.76, so almost 105 euros. In case that the new bond has a coupon of 10%, so that the coupon of the old bond and the coupon of the new bond are the same, then the two bonds have the same characteristics, and the price of the old bond will be equal to 100 euros. In case that the interest rate today is at the level of 20%, then of course the new bond has better characteristics than the old bond, and the old bond will be traded at a discount, and we can quantify here the discount. The discount is about 8 euros, so the price of the old bond will be equal to 91.67. So these calculations were to some extent very technical. It's not the case that we are asking for this kind of stuff in the final exam, but what is very important is that you gain the intuition. That you gain the intuition in case that the interest rate increases, the bond price decreases. And in case that the interest rate decreases, the bond price increases. What is very important is this last part of information on this slide 22, that we have an inverse relationship between the bond prices and the bond yields. What is really important is that you gained this intuition about the inverse relationship of the interest rate and the bond price. When the interest rate increases, then the bond price decreases. Now we can also refine our argumentation with respect to the role of the central bank and how the central bank influences the interest rates. One example for an expansionary monetary policy. In case that the central bank wants to perform an expansionary monetary policy, the central bank is buying more bonds, so the demand for bonds increases, the market value, the price increases, and hence the interest rate decreases. Two examples for a restrictive monetary policy. So the central bank buys fewer bonds, therefore the demand for bonds decreases, and this will lead to a decrease of the bond price. When the bond price decreases, the interest rate increases. So a restrictive monetary policy leads in the end to an increase of the interest rate. One alternative argumentation goes as follows. The central bank is selling bonds, therefore the supply of bonds increases, which decreases the bond price, and when the bond price decreases, the interest rate increases. So also in this alternative line of argumentation, a restrictive monetary policy leads in the end to an increase in the interest rate. This is the end of the second part. Since it was a little bit technical in between, I would also like to give you some minutes to digest, make a break here, and check whether you understood this part. Thank you very much. Have a nice day, and let's meet again in another video.